Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Chris Scantlebury, co-founder at ProConvey, and today we're going to be talking about something that has become hugely important in the property industry over the past couple of years, and that's material information. So if you're an estate agent, a conveyancer, or anyone involved in property transactions, you'll know the industry is moving toward more accurate information about property earlier in the process. And it's not just about compliance, it's about improving the buying and selling experience for your clients and for yourselves. And so today, joining me is Andrew Smith from Tytl. Tytl specialize in property data and material information. They help agents and professionals access and share that important property information quickly and clearly. And Andrew, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Good to be here, Chris.
Thank you. So before we dive directly into the topic itself about material information, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and the journey that led you to Tytl?
Yeah, sure. Fairly varied career path. Quite a lot of it outside property, which I think lends itself to bringing a different viewpoint in, one that can be very beneficial. But in a synopsis, essentially spent in consulting backgrounds, helping businesses digitize their service offering, going through either large-scale digital transformation projects or bringing people onto, for example, the wonders of back in the day, the web and retailing and commercialization of their business that way. And then more recently looking at the world of AI and how that plays and maps out and helps us grow businesses and services. Always had a keen eye on property, done a few property developments outside of core career, and was speaking with a client of mine, ex-client of mine, who had been engaged in Tytl, and I got brought into that business as an individual to help really make sure that we were fully listening to the needs of customers and making sure that actually we were a genuinely customer-centric business to help propel that business forward.
Yeah, I understand. For anyone listening who doesn't particularly know what Tytl does, could you just describe a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a property platform essentially, but it's quite different to a lot of the other property platforms out there. It's designed essentially around core properties for residential agents as its hub. We do have a number of subsets of audiences as well. Indeed, conveyancers, planning consultants, architects, that sort of realm. But a lot of our work is primarily focused on the residential space in both sales and lettings and helping agents actually generate revenue for their business. So one of our key points of difference is we don't just provide data. We do provide data. We're going to talk about that in a minute, and we provide it very well, high quality data. But what we generally tend to do is work out what are the points where we can help agents genuinely generate revenue for their business. And we have a number of services around that, of course, all underpinned from the data, which we're probably going to talk about in depth now.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, I just want to stress that we're working with you guys on that material information piece actually in ProConvey, and the data is it is great, including the reports that come back as well. So it is not just the data, raw data, is it? It can become in report form as well. But I think it's one of them things, material information, it seems to be a phrase that is chucked around more and more in the industry. And some people have different views on what material information actually is. So can you even, for someone listening and is not familiar with material information, can you explain what it actually means?
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially, material information is a composite set of all the knowledge that you believe you should be sharing with an individual before they make a choice, i.e., what facts should they know that might have a material impact on their decision. So whether they're buying a property or whether they're letting a property essentially from you, you need to provide that information up front. We were quite early out of the box with developing our solution in the sort of back end of 2024. We worked and made sure that we were excelling and going above what was then the trading standards guidance for providing that material information. That has obviously since transited from trading standards over to the CMA in terms of the guiding authority. That has led to a lot of confusion in the marketplace, which is possibly one of the things you're nodding towards there. For us and for the people that we speak to, and when you speak to some of the other experts in the industry, whether that's Property Mark, for example, or others, what you will get back is essentially that nothing has changed. That actually, if nothing else, the shift from trading standards to the CMA has made compliance even more important. Why is that? Well, one, because the trading standards gave very helpful parts A, B, and C, what you should include here, what you should include here, etc. And it was very defined. So I think agents had a lot of comfort from that because they could tick the box and feel confident in knowing what they should include. When it transitioned to the CMA, that guidance basically got pulled back because obviously trading standards weren't running anymore. The CMA didn't issue any specific guidelines, but what they basically said was wider, which was anything and anything that could be considered a material fact should be included in that process.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, being quite vague with it as usual. But I think we've done the work to understand where them data points are with you and made sure that we're covering at least A, B, and C plus a bit extra, right? So some examples for that for people listening could be tenure, council tax ban, flood risk, the planning restrictions, just all that information that I, as a conveyancer as well, when you do get a case, you're usually going sourcing yourself, having a little look at the EPC register, go to the planning portal. It's essentially just trying to remove that step and provide it all earlier so that even the buyer could have a look through it rather than, waiting for the transaction to go ahead and then discovering that some of that material information has a negative effect on the transaction, right? And I think one question that I always get asked when I'm going out to agents or even law firms is, where are the data sources behind that material information? Like, where is this information being pulled from? Could you explain a little bit about that with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's paramount to reinforce that this data comes from all the usual trusted sources. So what we do is we basically aggregate in and pull that and assimilate it and put it into, as you said, various different formats, whether it's data flows or whether it's actual reports, for example. So we were going to gather the data from the likes of Ordnance Survey, DEFRA, Homes England, Environment Agency, Land Registry, all of the local authority planning registers. All of that information is pulled in and assimilated in one easy to assess and digest place. That's the core of it. It just saves a huge amount of time for agents having to go to all the individual sources, put it together and stitch it in one place.
Yeah, exactly. So an example of that is like, when you are going to the EPC register, when we pull that material information into ProConvey, the data is from the EPC register, about the EPC. So it's coming from the sources you're probably most likely checking anyway. It's just making, just doing that for you, right? And I think that's a really key point as well for the conveyancers. I understand for the agents, material information has been pushed and is, it's about getting it ready as soon as possible and upfront before a buyer is even found. But the lawyers that are receiving the cases on ProConvey with that material information report, they're getting a benefit from that as well, because you do want a snapshot of that property when it comes to your desk, especially as a conveyancer. The risk is there that you need as much information as possible. So I don't think the benefit is just to the agents, and it definitely is to the lawyers and to the buyers as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, we have a number of conveyancing practices that we work with who readily use the data. They do so quite often for early insights into a particular case. So they do it to look for anything that they feel might mean that they might need to bring in some specialist resource from their business on a particular transaction, or just to give them the comfort that actually once they get the official searches back, because of course, there's the lag with the official searches, you can have all of that information available up front with Tytl or via yourselves into that system, which means you just got the known knowns up front. So nothing is going to come and surprise you further down the journey. So you are going to have not just time efficiencies from that, but the reassurance of knowing whether you're going to have a smooth job or whether you're going to have to bring, as I say, maybe a specialist in from the firm to help you with that particular transaction.
Certainly. I had one yesterday, a conveyancer actually that I did a demo with, and he asked, could he just use material information on ProConvey because he wanted to order it. So I was chatting with him and I said, like, why are you doing this? And he said, because it really does benefit me and the agents aren't doing it. So, his agents just weren't doing it. So he just jumped the gun and was like, right, I'll get the material information myself and then I'll share it with the agents. So he's kind of, seen the benefit of it, and he's kind of took that approach that, okay, this is going to be valuable on every single one of my cases. And I'm just going to go ahead and order that. So that is an option as well. And I think one of the things that we've been working on together with you is what I mentioned in there, integrating that Tytl data into our fast track sale cases. The fast track sale, for anyone that doesn't know, is essentially about preparing a property properly at the start of a transaction. And that's like full agent, full conveyancer, full seller onboarding, including bringing in material information is one data set, but the land registry data as well, just pulling it all in right at the start of a case to kick it off. And I think the material information is a real core part of that, because The buyers can see the property details earlier. They have more confidence progressing with that transaction. They've got a ready seller, and that transparency, I believe, it helps reduce delays and surprises later in the process, not only for the conveyancers, but reduces fall throughs because the buyers had that information up front now. They've reviewed it, they've seen it, they're not going to find any skeletons later on as well. And so, yeah, I think this is probably a good point to pause and just give you the floor for a minute, Andrew, if that's all right. And I guess what I'm wondering is, from your perspective, working with the property data every day, what do you think the industry is still getting wrong and is misinformed about that information?
I think there's a couple of points that are general frustrations that we see dealing with a whole range of property professionals. One would be the core disconnect between agents and conveyancers, whose role it is to find that information. That's a whole different topic that we could go off on. But aligned to that, which I think is more pertinent to this conversation, is, where does it come from and can everybody trust it throughout the chain? And that's a really, really important point. If I gather it from a client, if I gather it as an agent and I give it to the conveyancer, will the conveyancer be happy with that as part of the process? And that all for me stems down to, where that data comes from. Is it reliable? Is it trusted? And is it in a verified source in terms of having the authentication from the seller that it is verified and correct for their particular property? So that's probably one of the things that I'd say. The other one is about, you asked very specifically there about what the industry gets wrong. If I look at that from an estate agency perspective, I would say that there are still a number of agents in the field who would rather that this information didn't exist, and that it wasn't shown up front, and that they would rather an individual falls in love with the property first and then they'll deal with the problem once it's come up. Now, again, having had 5 years experience in this category very specifically, I would say that that is an absolute own goal every single time. There's not one failed transaction that hasn't been involved in as one of the results and the outcomes of those cases when you then drill down into it, for example. It's that information that if you are the honest agent, if you are trustworthy, if you are prepared to share this level of data about a property with a vendor or with a buyer, then you should be trusted to sell their property, because ultimately it benefits you as an agent.
Yeah, I think it's been short-minded actually, and thinking about the individual transactions and trying to get them through, but not visioning the whole of the pipeline. Your whole pipeline, I think it reduces fall throughs, or we've looked at some of the stats that we're doing, fall throughs by up to 35-45% over a range of 2,000 transactions was a pilot done by Movely. So if you look at your pipeline and, depending on how many cases you're doing a month, you could stop up to, let's say a third of your fall throughs. That's going to give you a better annual recurring revenue rather than the individual transaction that you're trying to, probably not, for lack of a better word, sneak through, right, with this information that you're aware of.
Oh, I agree. But even looking at the general sense of workflow, the biggest focus for an agent once they've got a property under offer is getting that property through the business as quickly as possible for cash flow, right?
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to potentially either cause a delay to that process or a fall through at worst, then it is, as I said, an ultimate own goal. And we've seen it a number of times. And I think whether it's the information appearing in a specific MI pack or, for example, one of our other property reports, you've always got the knowledge of what has happened to that property. And that's a really, really important, powerful point to note as an agent, because you can verify some of the other, planning issues, for example, those sorts of things that whilst they appear as part of the MI pack, they also appear in an agent's everyday life, right? You go around and you value a property, you can see what planning consents have been given. You can see, was a planning consent given for A, B, and C? And I've had plenty of agents tell me in the last 2 years that they've identified things that haven't had permission, and therefore that is going to slow that transaction down. Better they know that at the outset when they put that property on the market, they can flag it with a potential buyer. It becomes less of an issue. It's the same thing with things that, we haven't talked at all in this conversation, have we, about flooding and surface water flooding and flood risk in general. This is a massive, massive issue in the area of conveyancing at the moment, which often these things only come up too late in the day, and people get spooked by them, particularly flooding and surface water flooding. Whereas actually, I think you can manage surface water flooding as an agent in terms terms of contextual conversations and what it is and what it means and how it is, if you have a conversation earlier in the transaction.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's something what you pointed out there about the things are found out later in the transaction. I think it's yeah, I know conveyancers that will report on everything just before exchange. So there are things happening throughout the transaction. Each week you discover a new piece of information or a search comes back. But you sometimes aren't sharing every update with your clients, just to try and streamline that case and carry on with your work, and then report on it all at the end. And then that's when fall throughs typically happen. A week before exchange, for instance, you issue that title report. You're then letting the client know everything that you've found out about the property, and then they decide they don't want to purchase it because some information has come out. So I think having it all up front, not only for the buyers but for the agents and the sellers, it just means everyone's going into that transaction just in a much better prepared
Correct. Yeah.
system, and I think that's the difference. That's what we're trying to get across to the agents and the lawyers. We're not telling you to do any extra work here. It's just all the work you're going to be doing, but consolidated right at the start of a case to make the transaction a bit more smoother. So, and I think we are getting there. I wanted to touch on a couple of things you just mentioned there. Actually, I forgot the first one, but the second one was we were talking about the way the industry's the way the industry is heading. I think that's also going to be a bit of is going to change people's opinions on upfront information and verifying that it can be used as well. And I think one thing you touched on was, it's not great if the material information is gathered by the agent and then the lawyer receives that and doesn't trust it and then wants to go and check it themselves as well. Okay, that's not what we're looking to do here, right? We're looking to give them a verified piece of data that's shareable, that they can rely on, that they don't have to go and double check, right? And I think that is going to happen with a shift in the change in the industry, I think. And okay, so but then if we and looking ahead then, looking ahead a few years, where do you think property data and the material information are heading?
I think, we're we're at the start of that journey right now, aren't we? It has to be a more interconnected play. It has to be one of the parts of the ecosystem that is meshed together more clearly, more finely. And I think we're just at the beginning of that journey. And over the next 2 to 3 years, we'll start to see, I think, further consolidation in the space. We'll see systems integrate more. We'll stop thinking about, how do we put MI up in little parcels on our particulars if we're an agent, for example, one by one, and we'll start just seeing an end-to-end solution come together that will be just so much simpler for those transactions to just rely on, which basically means you're only ever, whether you're an individual, an agent, or a conveyancer, doing something once and it only being done once.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. I remember when I bought my house, the agent didn't really know a lot about the property. And I'm sure they're not expected to know everything about it. It's fast paced, isn't it? It must be tough. But what we're saying is, we can bring in that information for you that you can share with the buyer yourself. You as well as an agent don't have to go out and find that information. And it's just going to make it a lot simpler for your transaction, speed up your pipeline. All right then, Andrew, it's been a pleasure. But before we finish, I thought we could just fire off a couple of quick fire questions, if that's all right. I think the top one we've just covered, which is what's the biggest misconception about material information. But did you just want to single line that one?
Benefit, not burden.
Benefit, not burden. Yeah, understood. Yeah, getting it done is not asking you to do anything extra. It is just going to provide you with a clear upfront transaction. Regarding Tytl, what's one thing that agents could start doing with you guys today?
They could start having access to all of that data in one place at the single click of a button and feel confident in that data.
Yeah, understood. And lastly, where do you see property data in 5 years' time?
Do you know, I wouldn't predict 5 years' time at the moment. I would go on a 24, 36-month cycle max at the moment, because the way technology is evolving so fast. We will be in a space where, without a doubt, underpinning some of the features and the benefits and the processes that we all use, will be a much larger degree of AI in terms of that structure, process, and how we interface with that data as well, how we query it, how we find it, how we bring it together as a group of people, and it will have a big change to that structure.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one thing I'm trying to get across to the people I speak to as well is sometimes they don't see the value right now. But in a couple of years, once this data has all been aggregated and you're getting onto the second time that property's selling, that's when you're really going to see the benefit as well. Right now, with everyone collecting this data, I think that in the past, a property could have sold, let's say 9 months ago, and now you're the new seller solicitor. You're basically starting from scratch, with that property because the data's not stored yet.
No, you're not. But also, I think that's where agentic workflows are going to become much more prevalent, right? Because actually, that overcomes that exact point that you've just said, which is with an agentic workflow, with agents running some of these processes, potentially agent to agent, then you are going to see the consistency consolidate within the players that have evolved fastest within this space, because actually no one is starting net new. You've got all the history stored within that ecosystem and it is just being pulled back out. So I think, it's not unrealistic to expect that the conveyancing process could go, full agentic within the next 5 years.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, you heard it here first. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. Just before we leave, do you want to let the people know how they can get in touch with you, how they can find Tytl?
Yeah, it's tytl.com, tytl.com. I'm Andrew at tytl.com. It's really, really simple. Probably worth reinforcing. Tytl is obviously a play on the official title. Why do we do that? Because actually our whole story, our whole narrative and our whole belief as a business is the title is the authoritative source of data on that property. And that's where we build out all of our credible data from.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's, your rebrand's done really well, actually. I think it's a lot better. So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you do want to learn more about how Tytl data works and specifically how it works in the ProConvey platform, reach out to myself. I can let you know about the fast track sale process and how we can bring that material information into your workflow today. That's been Link in the Chain, podcast episode number 4. Thank you very much, guys.